What's up, everyone? True Techno Gamer here, and we're getting to the end of the year, so time for a little bit of reflection, right? And in particular, for this video, I want to talk about Xbox first-party game output for 2023. In particular, Xbox released 3 big AAA first-party games this year. We saw the release of Redfall, we saw the release of Starfield from Bethesda, and then just recently we saw the release of the new rebooted Forza Motorsport. And I want to talk about what impact those releases have had in terms of moving the needle on the, kind of the status of Xbox within the industry today, particularly on the console side. No secret that PlayStation 5 has been, pretty much dominating again in terms of the pure console sales this generation. Both the Xbox Series S and X, PS5 is outselling by roughly 2-1. It's no secret. Xbox has had a lot of setbacks, to say the least, and have really had, paltry first-party output for the new generation, for sure. They've had a lot of cross-gen releases. Pretty much everything they've had to this point have been cross-gen releases. So these 3 games were significant because this year, 2023, represented the first year that Xbox finally let go of the whole cross-gen thing, right? So Xbox One finally was getting, axed, so to speak. And Redfall, Starfield, and Forza Motorsport were only Series S and Series X releases, and PC, of course. So there was a lot of anticipation, right? There was a lot of anticipation, a lot of talk about this kind of being the coming out party for Xbox, the start of, the true start of the new generation for Xbox, this kind of stuff. And the way I look at it is, there's two aspects to look at these games here, and kind of, Xbox's first party games. The first is just purely on the merit of them being good games. Now, keep in mind that we're 3 years in, right, to the Series X and S generation. Literally this November will be 3 full years these games have been out on market. And to date, the only game that has released only for the Series consoles and PC to this point, literally, Flight Sim was the only game to release so far only on the Series. Everything else, Halo Infinite, Gears of War 5 was basically a remaster. Halo Infinite was a cross-gen game. Forza Motorsport 5, cross-gen, came out on Xbox One. Looked great, but it was cross-gen, right? So in terms of them being just good games, you look at the last roughly decade or so, going back even to the beginning of the Xbox One generation. And when we look at the Game of the Year, the top Game of the Year candidates and winners every year, you don't see anything from Xbox. You don't see any Xbox first-party games on that list. You don't. You just don't, right? You've seen Sony's God of War, Last of Us Part 2, games of that ilk. You've seen big games like Spider-Man as well on the PlayStation side, but, PlayStation has had a few. Ghost of Tsushima got a lot of praise when they came out, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Nintendo, both Zelda, Breath of the Wild and the most recent Zelda game, 3D, games, have been pretty much instant Game of the Years. The Mario games, etc. So Nintendo has had its fair share. Sony has had its fair share. No Microsoft. All right. I mean, there's not even a presence there. So what are you doing, Microsoft, with your first party output? That's been the question for years now. And going into the Series, generation, everyone is waiting for the coming out party. And this was supposed to be it. So from looking at it in terms of just good games, that's the first pillar. The second pillar is, when are we finally going to see the next generation games from Microsoft? When are we going to see those games that push the technical envelope from Microsoft? Whether it be graphics or, simulation or physics or something. Utilizing the SSD, utilizing, the 500 plus gigabytes of bandwidth that the Series X in particular has, right? Utilizing those 12 teraflops of GPU power, right? Utilizing that Zen 2 CPU, etc., etc. When are we really going to see that? See what Halo 3 looked like at the time. Halo 1, of course, back in the day. What Gears of War did for the 360 back in the day. What Fable, what Fable did, back in the day. When are we going to see that? Because we haven't, right? I mean, to date, again, there hasn't been any next gen. No games pretty much built for the Series X, especially, right, from the ground up. And what's happening on Xbox? Now, looking at it from those two pillars, let's start with just them being good games. Redfall, I think it's fair to say Redfall was a utter incomplete failure. The game just launched buggy, incomplete, technically, design-wise, it wasn't received well. I don't really need to go into that. It was just a mess of a game. And it was just horribly botched, which, by the way, is another theme we're seeing from Xbox first-party studios. Let me not get started on the condition of Halo Infinite when it was supposed to launch in 2020. And they showed that infamous trailer that summer that looked horrible. I mean, it literally looked like something that would be pre-alpha, right, as a school project. And that game was supposed to launch in 4 months from that point. Ridiculous. So overall, Redfall ended up with a 50-something Metacritic. I mean, it was pretty bad. I think it was like 56 or something like that. Horrible output there. It's kind of a tragic story for Microsoft. Then we get to Starfield. Now, let me cut to the chase. Starfield is not a bad game. It's selling a good amount via Game Pass. People are playing it. People are trying it. The problem with Starfield is that the anticipation for that game was that game was looked at as being Microsoft's Game of the Year contender. That game was looked at as being on the level of a God of War, let's say, for Sony. Okay? That game was looked at as being as seminal in gaming history as Skyrim was at the time, when it came out. And Fallout was previously before that. So there was just, and it also was looked at as being like the real, true, must-play game for the Xbox. You need to buy a Series console if you're a console gamer to play Starfield. And you need to get this if you play your games on your PC. That was the level, that was the expectation, that was the goal for Starfield. So based on that metric, did it hit that? Did it reach that? I'm sure all of you guys watching this may not agree. But my take is no, it didn't. Now, I haven't played Starfield extensively. I work in gaming. I have access to all of these games. I've seen it. I've played it a little bit. But just gauging, we see the reviews. I think Starfield ended up around like 83 Metacritic. Not bad, but clearly not setting the world on fire. Clearly not one of the top reviewed games of this year by any stretch. It also under-reviewed relative to Skyrim, to Fallout 4 and stuff like that. So, solid, I guess. But it has some issues, right? And it didn't set the world on fire. By that metric, it didn't do it. I don't think people are talking, initially people were talking about Starfield based on the previews, based on what it looked like on paper as being a Game of the Year contender. And I think the end result right now again, it's going to be updated. I'm sure they're going to kind of address and fix some of this stuff. The game is going to be better in a few months. But as of now, I don't think it's a Game of the Year contender. It's not going to unseat the Baldur's Gate 3, the Zelda, the Tears of the Kingdom, right? That level of games are cemented. We'll see what happens with Spider-Man 2, Diablo 4, Jedi Survivor, Hogwarts Legacy, Resident Evil 4. I mean, there were some huge games that came out this year. And Alan Wake 2 is still to come pretty soon here. And then Spider-Man, like I said. So I don't see Starfield as being received necessarily better than any of the games I just mentioned, for example. It's a loaded year, right? It's a really loaded year. Solid game, didn't quite hit that mark and those highs. It's not generally considered a must-play. A lot of people that have played it, even people that were super Xbox fans and that really enjoyed it, came away feeling kind of muted and kind of feeling like, okay, right? Could have been more. I was hoping for more. I was expecting more, okay? And then finally, Forza. I'm not going to sit here and say Forza is not a great game. We know Forza has always been a great game. From a pure game perspective, I think Forza ended up around, what, 85, 86-ish Metacritic. Solid game. Now, if you look at these things in the context of the next-gen factor, right, yeah, they fall even shorter, for sure, in that regard. Redfall, again, was a technical mess. Really had nothing going on in particular that was specific to the Xbox Series level consoles. We saw stuff like basic texture streaming issues. There was a ton of low-res textures that never seemed to load their full MIP levels. We saw stuttering. We saw, again, the Xbox console versions, launched without a 60 FPS mode, which is kind of crazy for a first-party game like that. We saw all of that. Just recently, they did launch with a 60 FPS mode. Finally, did an update. This is October, right? So, it initially came out back in May, right? So quite a while. But there's nothing about Redfall that points to it being next gen at all, right? I'm just gonna say loading times weren't like super fast either. Graphically, it wasn't terribly impressive, that kind of thing. Starfield, to be honest. Again, Starfield didn't really scream next gen in any way, shape, or form either. Loading times were left a lot on the table on the series consoles. The overall graphic aesthetic, the art is nice in many areas, but in some of the environments and some of the planets are lacking for sure. A lot of the planets and areas are just not very dense. They're just kind of barren, kind of open, not very lively from just a natural simulation perspective. The character models still look really off and just not very realistic. They don't animate super well either. Again, on the series consoles, it's limited to 30 frames per second using temporal upscaling using FSR to get to 4K. So it's not like it's native 4K 30. Not that it has to be. I'm just saying, just on a technical level, there's nothing here that points to it as being, something that's state-of-the-art or top end. And honestly, that's not really Bethesda's MO. I don't think that was even their goal or intention. People put that expectation on it, but they were never going to come out with some game that was super high end. And it's not. There's clear limitations on the whole scope with the whole planets thing. Everything is not continuous like it is in even something like No Man's Sky. You can be in space and literally fly down to a planet seamlessly. No, that's not what Starfield is about. In fact, again, it has a lot of loading time, actually, that breaks the action up. So, on a technical level, Starfield doesn't look any better than any Sony first-party game for sure on the PS5. And it doesn't really stand out. Let's just be honest in that regard, right? Even on the PC, it doesn't stand out, technically. And then finally, Forza Motorsport. And I've thought about this video in the context of Forza Motorsport just releasing. And the reality is, Forza Motorsport looks great, no question. It is a noticeable step up from Forza Motorsport 7, which was the last one from the last generation, right? The problem with Forza Motorsport, and we all know this, guys, now, is that what Turn 10 and Microsoft promised it would be, and they spent the last, mind you, this game has been in development for 6 years, right? There was a point where Forza Motorsport games were coming out every other year like clockwork. Even in the Xbox One generation, every other year, they were releasing new ones. 5, 6, 7, right? They take time off, essentially 6 years, to reboot the franchise. And then they come up with this. And it looks nice, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't look like a 6-year next-gen focused reboot level. And it doesn't look as good as they have been saying for years. And from all of the trailers and preview they showed before release. That's the problem. They literally showed preview trailers with ray tracing in-game, in races, that looked super high quality. Mirror reflections of super high resolution. Everyone assumed it was on PC, but even the PC version in the end doesn't look anything like that. They dropped features. They dropped RTGI. They lowered the resolution of the reflections. They limited the actual BVH range, so only certain things are actually reflected at certain times. There are issues with textures. They reduced the detail in the environments. They altered the lighting and kind of makes it look more grayed out now in terms of its final release. The performance overall is good, for sure. Some of the cars don't look too much different than Forza 7. But the end result is a game that I kind of expected that it wasn't going to hit the high bar that they've been saying and touting forever. 4K 60 with ray tracing in game in real time on console, including Series S. They said, including Series S, it was going to have ray tracing in game. Series S has no ray tracing at launch. You get the point. They under-delivered for that game for sure. And the end result doesn't really look much better than GT7 that came out nearly 2 years ago and was a cross-gen game that came out on PS4. It doesn't look much better than the PS5 version of that, because the PS5 version of GT7 absolutely upped the ante relative to PS4. So you got to put all of that in perspective. If I'm looking for games that's going to really move the needle as the Xbox owner or fan, I'm like, finally, we're going to get back to the Halo, Fables, Gears of War level, of greatness. These three games aren't it, although they're solid. Just want to feel, what is that next big thing? What is that? Xbox doesn't seem to be trying to do that anymore. I think the 360 did that in spades across the board. Even the UI stuff, not just the technical stuff, right? The UI stuff, the Xbox Live elements, at the time, everything about that system was forward thinking and really trying to move the needle and push the industry forward in meaningful ways. Xbox One obviously was trying to do that with the whole TV thing. That obviously was a misstep. Xbox Series doesn't do that in any way. It's like they're not even trying to, right? If it's not going to be at the hardware level, it's not going to be at the platform level, then it must be. I mean, they have Game Pass, but that's, again, that's PC as well. So if it's not going to be at that level, it must be with the games. Give us some games that are unique. And it's like the new Fable looks like it could be cool. Avowed, I think that's another kind of, mediocre game kind of waiting to happen. Perfect Dark has been in all kinds of limbo. The 007 GoldenEye remake reboot turned out to be not what we thought, not what we hoped. Halo, again, who knows what's happening with that. Gears of War has been MIA now for, over 4 years? Or about 4 years, I guess. And still no sign of what's happening. I mean, we know that Coalition is working on something, but no indication that it will even be a 2024 title. Probably 2025 or later. So, Xbox, come on, man. I really am. I in no way, shape, or form have I ever rooted for Xbox to fail. That's not good for the industry at large. I prefer PlayStation. That's no secret. But I'm not looking for Xbox to fail. I want to see Xbox do cool things. I want games I can play on my PC. I want reasons to say, damn, I really should get a Series X. I do. I really do. And it's just, I don't know what they're doing. But a lot of Xbox gamers have been saying this. And, there's a lot of truth to it. So what do you think? How do you feel about those three games? Are you Starfield a Game of the Year contender in your mind? Could Forza Motorsport be a Game of the Year contender in your mind? Is it the definitive racing game that, Turn 10 said it would be? Is Xbox on the track to, really be starting, I guess a new run, so to speak, in terms of their gaming output? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for listening. True Techno Gamer. Till next video, signing off.